Welcome to Sleepy History with Karry. Take a deep, gentle breath in and let it out slowly. Feel the weights of the modern world begin to dissolve as we step directly into the quiet, starlit shadows of the late 18th century. Imagine the frantic pace of your day fading away, replaced by the soft glow of candlelight and the profound, comforting stillness of the past. We find ourselves in London during the losing years of the Mortmain Bacham Gay. Outside, a dense silver fog rolls slowly off the River Thames, swallowing the cobblestone streets and wrapping the city in a cold, silent embrace. But our journey takes us inside, rising high above the misty alleys into a tightly closed attic room. The heavy wooden window shutters are drawn completely shut against the night air, sealing the interior in absolute solitude. Inside this quiet sanctuary, the deep silence is broken only by a fragile rhythmic sound, the faint, intermittent coughing of a young noblewoman resting against a mountain of velvet pillows, and the slow, deliberate scratching of a pen nearby. The condition slowly altering her physical form is known to this era by a haunting name: consumption. To the world today it is recognized as a chronic pulmonary affliction, but in the 18th century it was called the White Plague. Unlike the sudden, chaotic destruction of alternative historical diseases, this condition is a slow, deliberate thief of time. It moves through the human body with an unsettling quietness, gradually transforming the patient over many months and years. It elongates the physical features, turns the skin into a pale, translucent porcelain white, and leaves a brilliant, almost otherworldly luster in the eyes, before the final exhaustion takes hold. As we listen to the quiet breathing and the steady rhythm of the narrative, inside this dimly lit room, we are looking at far more than a biological condition. We are witnessing a profound psychological and social phenomenon. In the high society of Western Europe, particularly in the grand circles of England and France, this slow physical decline was not met with horror or rejection. Instead, the elite culture completely romanticized it into the ultimate symbol of spiritual purity, artistic genius, and aristocratic refinement. Tonight we will step directly into this history, exploring how the closing of a century turned a silent fade into a grand fashion statement of a class, while allowing the calm, slow rhythm of our journey to soothe your nervous system and carry you into a peaceful, deep sleep. Let your thoughts rest in the absolute quiet of this late century night. There is no rush, no worries, and nothing you need to solve. The past is perfectly still, and you are entirely safe. This is an ambient historical narrative curated exclusively for relaxation, sleep assistance, and educational entertainment. Derived from authentic primary records and antique chronicles, the prose has been softly adapted to foster a soothing, restful atmosphere. As the faint, rhythmic sound of that fragile breathing fades back into the deep silence of the London attic, we begin our direct exploration into the collective psyche of the late Mortmain Bay Gate. To understand how such a condition could be woven into the fabric of high society, we must look at the profound psychological phenomenon that gripped the elite circles of both England and France. This was an era dominated by the birth of the Romantic movement, a cultural shift that completely rejected the cold mechanical logic of the early machine age. Instead, poets, philosophers, and the aristocracy began to elevate deep human emotion, spiritual intensity, and vulnerability above all else. Within this framework, the physical manifestation of consumption was viewed not as a failure of the body, but as a supreme elevation of the soul. In the grand salons of Paris and the elegant drawing rooms of London, high society constructed a strange melancholic belief system. They began to view the slow, quiet fading of the body as the definitive mark of the sensitive elite. The common perception was that those with the most refined minds, the deepest capacity for artistic expression, and the most elegant spirits were the ones most susceptible to this decline. The gradual loss of physical weight was interpreted as a physical proof that the spirit was growing too pure, too ethereal, to remain anchored to the heavy, material reality of the earth. Robust, sun-darkened health and physical strength were suddenly looked down upon as vulgar, coarse, and tied strictly to the manual labour of the lower classes. To be pale, quiet, and physically diminished became the ultimate status symbol of aristocratic grace. This collective romanticization turned the biological decline into a grand fashionable performance. In their private journals, which we can almost hear rustling with a soft sot in the midnight quiet young noblewomen and intellectuals wrote of their condition with a serene, poetic detachment. They believed that as the physical form became thinner, the intellect and the creative mind grew brighter, allowing the light of the soul to shine through the translucent skin with a brilliant, glassy luster. It was an era where sadness was transformed into the highest form of art, and where the ultimate journey of life was approached with a stylized, collective dignity that masked the true fragility of human existence. Before we look closer at how this powerful psychological illusion directly reshaped the literal fashion and daily habits of the century, let us take a gentle, quiet moment to ground ourselves in the present. If you find peace, comfort, and a sense of healing in these soft journeys through the deep layers of history, please take a soft moment to support our sanctuary. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this narrative, or share your own peaceful thoughts in the comments below. Your beautiful presence and ongoing support are what allow us to keep this quiet haven alive, offering a restful space where history and sleep meet perfectly every single night. Now let the heavy, golden warmth of the candlelight wash over your awareness once more. Listen to the imaginary sound of the wind, softly brushing against the tightly sealed wooden shutters outside. The world of the late 18th century is turning slowly, wrapped in its own mysteries, and you are completely safe, far removed from all its noise. By observing this historical desire to find beauty within vulnerability, your own nervous system is permitted to gently relax and let go. You do not need to perform to achieve or to match any standards of the outside world tonight. Like the quiet historic rooms of the past after the candles have burned low, your mind is invited to dim its thoughts, to release the tensions of the day, and to float peacefully into a deep, heavy, and beautifully unbroken rest. As we remain within the quiet shelter of that late 18th century evening, the soft glow of the candlelight reveals how deeply this collective mindset altered the physical world. The romanticization of the silent fade did not remain confined to handwritten poems or private whispered conversations in the grand salons. It actively reshaped the literal fabric of daily fashion, turning the physical presentation of consumption into the most dominant blueprint for elite beauty in both London and Paris. In the high society circles of the Mort Gay, looking delicate and physically diminished was elevated to a supreme art form, because the condition naturally caused a pale, translucent quality of the skin and a deep, intense brilliance in the eyes. The aristocracy sought to copy these exact characteristics through deliberate cosmetic choices. Wealthy individuals applied generous layers of fine white powder made from rice or porcelain dust to their faces, necks, and hands. The goal was to erase any trace of natural warmth or outdoor exposure, creating a smooth marble-like complexion that signaled a lifestyle completely removed from manual labor. To enhance this fragile appearance, some sophrostyus lost delicate blue pigments to trace artificial veins across their temples and wrists, showcasing a structural delicacy that was deemed incredibly elegant and refined. This obsession with a fragile silhouette soon dictated the very design of clothing. The heavy, highly structured, and brightly coloured brocades that had defined the earlier decades of the century were cast aside. In their place, high fashion embraced sheer lightweight materials, most notably fine white muslin, airy gauze, and soft fluid silk. These fabrics were draped in long, flowing lines that made the wearer appear almost weightless, like an ethereal figure moving quietly through a dreamscape. Dresses were tailored with tight lines to emphasize a narrow, breakable frame, while wide, decorative fans were used with deliberate grace to partially shield the face, adding an element of melancholic privacy and quiet withdrawal to every gesture. What we are observing through this historical lens is a profound social language. By turning a physical vulnerability into a rigid aesthetic standard, the upper classes create a distinct fashion of the soul. It was a visual declaration of sensitivity, intellect, and class status. To appear distant, quiet, and physically fragile was to announce oneself as a member of a sensitive elite, a generation that valued emotional depth far above the loud, material pursuits of the rapidly changing world outside. Let the image of these fading silk gowns bring a sense of slow, rhythmic calm to your own mind. In the safety of the present night, you are completely free from the demands of appearances and expectations. There is no need to perform, no need to adapt, and no need to carry the weight of the outside world. Allow your body to sink deeply into the comfort of your bed. Let your breathing slow down, matching the steady, peaceful darkness that wraps around the history of yesterday, as we prepare to look behind this elegant curtain of fashion and examine the true environment that shaped this unforgettable era. As the image of those elegant silk gowns and white powdered portraits gently fades into the dim light of our room, let us extend our awareness just a little further. Let us softly look beyond the velvet curtains and behind the beautiful tragic illusion that high society so carefully constructed, while the grand salons of London and Paris celebrated this spiritual purity. The world outside the closed windows held a much more grounded, environmental truth. This was the dawn of a new era, and the reality of human vulnerability was deeply intertwined with the changing landscape of the earth itself. If we were to open the heavy wooden shutters of our 18th century attic and look out into the London night, we would see a city undergoing a massive transformation. The late Motheen Baycham gay mark the early beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. The quiet green fields of the countryside were gradually being replaced by the first generation of coal-burning workshops and rising brick chimneys. A heavy, dense canopy of dark smoke and fine soot began to mingle permanently with the natural cool river fog of the Thames. This created a stagnant, trapped atmosphere that hung over the cobblestone streets, creeping into the narrow alleys and settling softly onto the roofs of grand estates and humble cottages alike. Inside the homes, the social habits of the period only added to this heavy atmosphere, because the outside air was becoming increasingly filled with industrial soot. People instinctively closed their paned glass windows and sealed their doors tight. They lived their lives in enclosed, stagnant spaces, lit by the constant burning of tallow candles and coal-fired hearths. This lack of fresh, moving air and the absence of warm sunlight created an environment of deep physical confinement. The very air that the generation breathed was dense and tired, making the lungs of both the wealthy and the poor progressive fatigue. To a quiet, progressive fatigue. The great irony of this historical moment lies in how human psychology chose to interpret this environmental confinement. Instead of recognizing that their bodies were reacting to the crowded, smoke-filled reality of early modern cities, the cultural elite chose to internalize it as a poetic condition. They mistook the physical heavy-heartedness caused by a changing, polluted world for a state of artistic melancholy. It was far more comforting for the collective mind to believe that a young noblewoman was fading because her soul was too beautiful for the earth, rather than admitting that her environment had simply become too heavy to breathe. Let the realization of this historic contrast wash over you like a quiet, comforting wave. The heavy fogs of that early industrial world have long since dissolved into the past. The closed, stagnant rooms of the 18th century are gone, and you are resting in a space that is completely safe, clear, and peaceful. Notice the deep, easy rhythm of your own breathing in the quiet of tonight. You do not have to carry the weight of changing eras or environmental noise. Like the city of London after the heavy machinery falls silent for the night, your mind is invited to rest, to let go of the need to analyze, and to sink deeply into the soft, unburdened stillness of a peaceful sleep. As the image of the smoke-filled streets outside the window slowly settles into the background, we turn our gaze back inside the deep stillness of our late 18th century room. The contrast remains perfectly clear. Outside, the early modern world is rushing into an era of loud machinery and heavy coal dust. But inside, under the soft protection of the candlelight, everything moves with a slow, deliberate peace. Here, the only sound that breaks the midnight quiet is the gentle, comforting rustle of aged paper, as soft as the private journal of the young noblewoman is gently resting open on the dark wooden table. This fragile sound of turning pages is a direct invitation for your mind to slow down, anchoring your nervous system in the deep sanctuary of the past. In these handwritten lines, we find the intimate thoughts of a generation trying to navigate a rapidly changing world. They did not write Vecapite hat, panic or fear about the heavy environment outside. Instead, they used their journals to create a quiet space of reflection. They recorded the beauty of the small overlooked graces around them, the warm glow of a dying hearth, the comforting weight of a woolen shawshal, and the soothing quality of watching the silver river fog press against the glass panes. It was their way of finding a calm centre within the industrial storm. Before we follow these gentle thoughts further into the late night hours, if you find a sense of comfort and healing in these quiet journeys through history, please take a soft moment to support our channel. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this video, or share your own peaceful reflections in the comments below. Your ongoing support is a beautiful gift that allows us to keep this quiet sanctuary alive, creating a restful space where the noise of the day can completely fade away into the night. Now, let your thoughts sink even deeper into the soft cushions of the present moment. Picture the ink on those old journal pages, long since dried and preserved through the centuries. The people of the late Mortneen Bay J have finished their writing, their pens have been laid down, and their long days are completely done. The heavy velvet curtains in the room remain motionless, guarding the deep stillness of the interior against the demands of the world outside. You are completely safe and disconnected from all the worries of your own modern day. There are no factory clocks ticking for you tonight, no production to finish, and expectations to meet. Like those ancient volumes of poetry resting on the dark wooden shelves, your mind is permitted to remain perfectly still. Let your chest rise and fall with an easy, unburdened rhythm. Breathe in the clean, clear air of your room, and let your entire being dissolve effortlessly into the soft, heavy, and beautifully dark embrace of a deep sleep. As the deep mid-century darkness wraps itself fully around our quiet London room, the fading echo of that tragic, beautiful era leaves us with a profound space for contemplation. We have looked behind the porcelain makeup, the sheer muslin gowns, and the silver fogs of the late modern Bay Gay. We have seen how an entire generation, caught in the suffocating transition toward an industrial world, chose to paint its physical vulnerability with the soft colours of romance and spiritual nobility. It was a time when humanity, perhaps for the first time on such a grand scale, used art and fashion to rewrite a harsh biological truth into a narrative of grace, creating a temporary psychological shield against the harsh realities of a changing world. The silent fade of the 18th century reminds us of a timeless human truth, that when the world around us becomes too heavy, too loud, or too mechanized, we instinctively reach for beauty and meaning to find comfort. The poets, artists, and noble figures who sat in these closed rooms were not merely passive observers of a changing environment. They were seekers of sanctuary. They chose to view their fragile days on earth not as a dark countdown, but as a slow, deliberate period of pure presence, an opportunity to value a soft whisper, a flickering candle, or a line of heartfelt poetry far above the cold efficiency of turning gears and rising factory chimneys. From our vantage point in the modern world, we can gently carry this profound lesson into our own lives tonight. We live in an era that often demands us to be unbreakable, to move with endless speed, and to constantly produce without pausing. But history whispers to us, through the quiet shutters of the past, that there is a deep, sacred validity in our own moments of weariness. It reminds us that it is entirely natural to feel fragile sometimes, to desire slowness, and to need a pace of the external world, Nold, is simply not permitted to enter. Tonight, you are allowed to put down your daily armour, step away from the modern machinery of your life, and simply embrace the quiet grace of restorative rest. Let the air in your room feel light, clean and cool. The heavy coal-stained fogs of old London have long since vanished into the night of yesterday. The grand candlelit salons of Paris are perfectly still, their guests asleep and their stories safely preserved. There is nothing left for you to analyse, nothing to shield against, and nothing to perform. You have survived the demands of your day, and your only remaining duty to yourself is to surrender to the soft, unconditional embrace of the dark hours ahead. This content was generated with the assistance of specialized artificial intelligence models and subsequently analyzed, refined by the research team at Sleepy History with Karry. All rights reserved. As you drift off, leave the noise of the day to the pages of yesterday, and allow your thoughts to rest where time stands perfectly still. As the special notes of our shared journey resonate softly in the midnight quiet, we do not leave this 18th century sanctuary. Instead, we pull our chairs closer to the sleeping world of the past, entering a deeper room of contemplation. To fully reach the enormous depth of this historic era, we must look at how this cultural phenomenon left its permanent mark on the great libraries and literature of England and France. The collective mindset of the late Mortneen Bay Gay did not just stop at Mort Fee changing cosmetics and clothing styles. It completely took over the minds of the greatest writers, poets, and novelists of the generation, weaving the quiet aesthetic of the Saint-Flay Gide into the very definition of romantic genius. During this specific period, if you were to walk into a bookstore in London or a literary gathering in Paris, you would find that the protagonists of the most popular stories shared the exact same physical traits as the young woman in our attic room. Authors did not write muscular energy. Instead, the characters who captured the hearts of readers were always depicted as fragile, ethereal, and beautifully pale, because writers used their quills to describe these characters as possessing a divine inner light, a light that grew more intense and brilliant even as their physical forms grew weaker. The physical condition was treated in literature as a form of intellectual purification, a slow process where the heavy, unpoetic layers of the human body were burned away by the sheer intensity of the characters' thoughts and emotions. This literary trend served a major psychological purpose for the society of the late 18th century. The rapid expansion of early modern cities, with their noisy iron foundries and dark coal smoke, felt incredibly overwhelming to the creative mind. Poets felt that the beautiful natural world was being swallowed by industrial greed and mechanical routine. In their eyes, the quiet, slow decline of consumption became the ultimate tragic protest against this heavy modernization. By writing about characters who faded away gracefully, authors were creating an artistic rebellion. They were telling the world that the finest human spirits would rather dissolve into the quiet dark than allow themselves to be integrated into the loud, dusty gears of the new industrial empire. Let the rhythmic cadence of this historical truth sink softly into your awareness. As we contemplate the deep connection between the literature of the past and the human desire for emotional purity, feel your own thoughts losing their sharpness. The grand libraries of the Mortneen Bay Gay are quiet now, their heavy leather volumes resting undisturbed on dark oak shelves. You do not need to read, to learn, or to analyze any further tonight. The stories of yesterday are safely preserved, and the air around you is perfectly still. Let your breath become slow, steady, and deep, matching the silent rhythm of history as we prepare to step into the next layer of this quiet evening. As those ancient volumes of poetry rest silently upon the dark oak shelves, their pages holding the frozen thoughts of a faded century, we look deeper into the sharp social dividing line that these very books helped to draw. This was not a passive trend that merely existed in the background of European life. It was an active construction of class identity. In the late Mortmain Begay, the aristocracy of England and France felt their traditional power and clean lifestyle being threatened by the rapid rise of the industrial merchant class. The crowded, soot-heavy urban centres were expanding, creating a new world driven by physical labour, buscom strength, and the mechanical accumulation of wealth. In direct defiance of this changing social order, the high nobility used the silent fade of consumption to establish a severe, unmistakable boundary of elegance that no amount of industrial money could ever purchase. To understand this powerful class psychology, one must look at how the physical symptoms of this decline were aggressively transformed into an exclusive social currency, while the working class people in the factories were forced to maintain a robust, sun-exposed and muscular physique just to survive the heavy machinery. The elite turned the lack of physical substance into a badge of supreme honour. The translucent porcelain skin and the fragile, narrow frame completely untouched by the dirty reality of manual work. High society created a tragic paradox where a severe biological vulnerability was turned into a luxury, a statement that declared the individual S-body was too delicate, too refined, and too spiritually advanced to endure the heavy air and the coarse demands of the modernizing world. It was a fashion of exclusion, a way to say that even in decline the aristocracy remained entirely separate from the rest of humanity. Before we dive deeper into how this sharp division between the classes influenced the quiet habits within these candlelit rooms, let us take a soft, comforting moment to re-anchor ourselves in the quiet of the present. If you find peace, deep relaxation, and a sense of safe reflection within these continuous journeys through the hidden layers of history, please consider supporting our sanctuary. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this video, or share your own peaceful thoughts in the comments below. Your beautiful support is the very foundation that allows us to keep this quiet haven alive, offering a restful space where the heavy noise of the modern world can completely dissolve into the stillness of the night. Now allow your mind to sink back into the dim golden warmth of that late 18th century room. Listen to the imaginary steady rhythm of the rain outside as it washes the heavy cool soot from the cobblestone streets, leaving the world outside as quiet as the space within. The deep contradictions of the past are safely locked away in the annals of time, and you are entirely free from their weight. You do not need to build any social boundaries tonight, nor do you need to prove your refinement or status to anyone in the world outside. In the complete safety of your room, you are permitted to let go of all structures and expectations. Let your chest rise and fall with an easy, unburdened rhythm, matching the slow, unchanging pulse of the midnight hour. Breathe in the clear, clean air around you. Let your heavy thoughts soften at the edges, and allow your entire being to float peacefully into a state of total, undisturbed surrender to a long and restorative sleep. As the steady rhythmic sound of the midnight rain continues to wash over the London cobblestones, dissolving the heavy layer of factory soot into the dark earth, we are forced to confront the deepest and most tragic paradox of this entire historical phenomenon. This cultural veil of romanticism and class fashion did not merely exist as an innocent comfort for the elite. It directly altered the path of medical science and human understanding. because the high society of England and France chose to look at the slow physical decline through a purely artistic and spiritual lens. They effectively blinded themselves to the material, biological truths that were happening right in front of their eyes within these tightly sealed rooms. For decades during the late Mortneen Bacham Gay, the dominant medical belief was that this affliction of the lungs was a non-contagious condition driven entirely by personal temperament, intense emotional sensitivity, and hereditary refined genetics. When multiple members of an aristocratic family faded away one after another, society did not recognize it as a chain of biological transmission through the shared air. Instead, poets and even some medical practitioners interpreted because poedix bellicit to splay two wex spirits, whose collective spirit to survive the harsh reality and of the changing world. This psychological interpretation meant that no precautions were taken to protect the healthy from the weary. The heavy velvet curtains remained unwashed, the windows stayed closed, and family members continued to sit closely together in the stagnant candlelit air, whispering poetry to one another, while unknowingly breathing in the very element that was sealing their collective fate. This historical reality offers a profound, sobering truth for our modern minds to contemplate as we look back through the mists of time. It reveals how powerful human culture can be when it desperately seeks to avoid an uncomfortable reality. The elite preferred to celebrate a beautiful, tragic illusion rather than face the chun-chewy epidemiological fact that their modernizing cities had become unsanitary and dangerous to human respiration. They chose to turn a public health crisis, using white porcelain, powder, and sheer muslin silk to mask the urgent necessity for clean air, open windows, and environmental reform. Let the weight of this historic realization transform into a sense of profound clarity and relief within your own mind tonight. The illusions of the 18th century have long since broken apart, and the truth has set us entirely free. As you lie in the complete safety of your modern room, notice how effortlessly your lungs can expand and contract with the clean, unburdened air around you. You are not required to hide your physical reality behind any cultural masks or social performances. The demands of the day are fully completed, the contradictions of history are resting safely in the past, and you are permitted to exist in a state of absolute, unvarnished peace. Let your breathing remain slow, steady, and deep, guiding your entire nervous system into a heavy, continuous, and restorative sleep. As the deep midnight rain gradually softens into a gentle mist, like drizzle over the sleeping roofs of London, the candle inside our tightly sealed attic room burns down to its final inches. The golden flame wavers slightly, casting long, slow shadows across the dark wooden walls and the heavy velvet drapes that have kept the outside world at bay for so many hours. In this profound stillness, where the ticking of a distant pendulum clock feels like the very pulse of the late 18th century, we can see how this environment of physical confinement and social illusion forced a strange, unexpected evolution within the human psyche. Because the generation of the Mot Becham Guillet chose to wrap this physical decline in a shroud of high fashion and spiritual nobility, they inadvertently created an entirely new way of experiencing time. In our modern, fast-paced world, we are constantly pushed to look toward the horizon, to plan for the future, and to measure our self-worth by our endless productivity. But inside these unventilated, candlelit sanctuaries of the past, the future was recognized as something incredibly fragile and uncertain. This realization, though wrapped in a tragic cultural mask, forced the intellectual elite to practice a level of absolute presence that the modern mind rarely achieves. When a young noblewoman looked at her pale, translucent hands by the light of a fading hearth, she was not thinking about the next decade. She was fully anchored in the immediate beauty of the now. Every single detail of existence within these enclosed spaces was amplified and treated with a quiet, almost sacred reverence. the delicate texture of a porcelain teacup, the soft whisper of silk moving across the floorboards, the precise emotional weight of a single line of handwritten poetry. All of these minor elements became deeply profound. The social elite, in their psychological effort to escape the ugly reality of early industrial factories and polluted air, wound up discovering the immense value of radical slowness. They proved that when you strip away the frantic noise of a busy world, the human spirit is capable of finding an intense, beautiful clarity within the smallest sliver of time. This historical contrast offers a comforting, healing truth for you to hold on to in the quiet of the present night. As you lie here, completely safe and protected from the demands of your own modern life, realize that you too have the permission to step off the turning gears of productivity. You do not need to solve the mysteries of tomorrow, nor do you need to carry the heavy burdens of what was left undone today. Like the quiet rooms of the past when the final carriage has faded into the fog, your only requirement in this moment is to simply exist. Let the clean, cool air of your bedroom fill your chest with absolute ease. The stagnant, smoke-filled atmospheres of the 18th century are nothing more than ghosts in old books, and you are resting in a haven of perfect safety. Allow your breathing to match the slow, steady rhythm of a world at rest. Let your heavy thoughts dissolve into the soft darkness around you, and let your entire being sink effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and beautifully continuous sleep. As the deep protective shadows of the long night slowly begin to soften, we remain directly inside that historic attic room, watching the very final phase of this cultural phenomenon play out. The year is creeping closer to the turn of a new century, and the first incredibly faint, cool light of dawn is beginning to filter through the small cracks in the wooden window shutters. This transition from the darkness of the late Mortneen Bay J into the light of a new era marks the exact moment when the rigid illusion of the silent fade began to experience its very first fractures. The collective mind of high society, which had spent decades treating a physical vulnerability as an exclusive badge of aristocratic elegance, was about to be forced awake by the unyielding progression of time and human understanding. Standing by the dark wooden table, looking down at the dried ink of the journals and the remaining dust of the white porcelain's powder, we can see the approaching end of this fashion of the soul. As the 19th century opened, the reality became too massive, too loud, and too undeniable to be ignored or romanticized away inside sealed bedrooms. The rising middle class, the growth of modern science, and the early pioneers of public health began to challenge the melancholic standards of the old aristocracy. People started to realize that the pale complexions and weak frames they had worshipped were not symbols of spiritual purity or genetic superiority, but were the direct, logical consequences of environmental neglect and a lack of fresh air. The romantic curtain was slowly being pulled back, exposing the undeniable truth that the human body requires a connection to the natural world, rather than a lifestyle of dark, aesthetic confinement. Yet, as this long historical night comes to its natural conclusion, we do not look back at this generation with judgment, but with a deep, peaceful understanding. They were a society caught in the middle of a massive storm of modernization, using the only tools they had, art, fashion, and poetry, to protect their inner world from the cold efficiency of machines. By observing their intense desire to find grace within vulnerability, your own mind is permitted to find its own quiet center tonight. You have seen the full arc of their story, from the silver fogs of the Thames to the candlelit salons of Paris, and now, just like the history itself, it is time for everything to become perfectly still. Let the complete dissolution of the past wrap around you like a heavy warm blanket. The closed rooms of old London are empty now. The candles have completely burned away, and the people of that faded century are resting in an eternal undisturbed peace. There are no more paradoxes for you to solve, no more histories to trace, and no more weights to carry. In the absolute safety of your present room, The air is clean, the night is silent, and you are entirely free. Allow your breathing to sink into its deepest, most natural rhythm. Let your thoughts fade into the dark background of the room, and allow yourself to float effortlessly into a heavy, unbroken, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the faint, cool light of the early morning continues to touch the edges of the wooden shutters, the transition into the 19th century brings an undeniable shifting of the tides. The collective illusion that had held London and Paris in its melancholic grip for decades could no longer sustain its weight against the steady, cold light of emerging scientific truth. What high society had desperately classified as a poetic disease of the soul, a beautiful manifestation of aristocratic refinement, was systematically unmasked by the birth of modern epidemiology. The Romantic era was drawing its final slow breath, leaving behind the dimly lit rooms to face the stark, unfiltered reality of human biology and environmental health. With the arrival of this new century, early medical researchers and public health pioneers began to step out of the traditional paradigms. They stopped looking at mot-fave poetry books and started looking directly at the air, the water, and the structural design of human habitations. Through systematic observation, they began to point out the undeniable connection between the closed, unventilated architecture of luxury and the physical decline of its inhabitants. They proved that the pristine white skin and the glassy brilliance of the eyes were not badges of spiritual genetic superiority, but the clear signs of a body starved of oxygen and sunlight, trapped in spaces where the air was repeatedly breathed and never renewed. The great romantic curtain that the aristocracy had used to hide their vulnerability was completely torn down, forcing a generation to realize that no amount of porcelain powder or fine muslin Charles Haute hat could protect them from the physical laws of the natural world. As we witness the final dissolution of this historical myth, let us take a gentle, quiet moment to anchor our awareness in the peace of the present. If these deep, continuous journeys through the hidden layers of our past bring a sense of mental clarity and emotional rest to your evening, please take a soft moment to support our channel. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this narrative, or share your own peaceful thoughts in the comments section below. Your beautiful presence and ongoing support are the vital foundation that allows us to keep this quiet sanctuary alive, providing an unburdened space where history and deep sleep meet perfectly every night. Now, let your mind return to the absolute stillness of that changing era. The grand drawing rooms that once worshipped the fragile frame have grown quiet, their heavy velvet drapes taken down to let the fresh morning air flow through the windows for the very first time. The long-held social illusions have dissolved into the mists of history, leaving behind a world that finally learned the true, simple value of breathing deeply without fear. You are completely safe from the turning points of history and the changing thoughts of the world outside. Your day is fully completed, its tasks are laid aside, and your modern room is filled with nothing but clear, peaceful tranquility. You do not need to perform to adapt or to balance any expectations tonight. Like the old cities of Europe after the long night has finally passed, your mind is invited to dim its remaining thoughts, to let go of the need to understand, and to sink effortlessly into a deep, heavy and beautifully unbroken rest. As the cold, unyielding light of truth completely replaced the dim candlelight of the old century, a grand physical awakening began to sweep through the grand houses of England and France. The realization that the silent fade was caused by trapped, polluted air rather than a beautiful, poetic soul forced an immediate revolution in the way human beings designed their daily lives. The long-held habits of high society, which had prioritized dark, aesthetic refinement for the sake of class status, were systematically abandoned in favor of a new, healthier relationship with the natural world. Imagine the heavy wooden shutters of those London attic rooms being thrown wide open for the first time in generations. The cool, crisp morning air rushes into the stagnant spaces, instantly clearing away the lingering sense of melting tallow old leather books and drying lavender. The thick velvet drapes, which had served as protective walls against the outside world, were taken down and replaced with light, easily washable linens that allowed the pure sunlight to flood the dark wooden floorboards. Society stopped hiding from the atmosphere. The upper classes began to realize that the human body was not an ethereal entity meant to dissolve into a dreamscape, but a living part of the earth that required fresh movement, open spaces, and the direct warmth of the sun to truly thrive. This shifting mindset quickly transformed the literal face of fashion and cosmetics. The thick, toxic layers of white porcelain powder and rice dust were gently laid aside, never to dominate the drawing rooms again. The desire for a deathly marble-like complexion faded away, replaced by an emerging appreciation for a natural, healthy glow. High society stopped artificial vein painting and ceased celebrating the breakable frame. Wealthy individuals began to leave their enclosed salons to walk along the seaside terraces and through the open countryside, actively seeking the very things their parents had feared: the clean sea breeze, the open horizon, and the unfiltered energy of the daylight hours. Let the imagery of these opening windows and clearing atmospheres bring a profound sense of lightness to your own mind tonight. The long, heavy era of social illusions and environmental confinement has completely dissolved into the past. Just like those grand houses that finally let the fresh air wash through their hallways, your own space is entirely clear, safe, and undisturbed. You do not need to lock yourself away from reality, nor do you need to perform for any social standards. The world outside is perfectly still, the history of yesterday is safely put away, and you are permitted to breathe with absolute unburdened freedom. Feel your chest rise and fall in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Allow your thoughts to grow soft and distant, matching the deep stillness of the night, as your entire being sinks effortlessly into a heavy, continuous, and restorative sleep. As the cool, fresh air of the new century continued to wash through the newly opened windows of London and Paris, the transformation did not stop at the thresholds of private homes. It spilled out directly into the very architecture of the cities themselves. The birth of modern public health and epidemiology forced governments and urban planners to look at the wider landscape of human habitation. They began to realize that if individual rooms needed to breathe, then the entire metropolis required a system of ventilation as well. The dark, cramped layout of early industrial towns, which had allowed coal smoke and stagnant river fog to hang permanently over the cobblestones, was fundamentally challenged by a new vision of urban balance and natural integration. During this period of awakening, the concept of the urban lung was born. In London, vast areas of public parks, wide green avenues, and open botanical gardens. These spaces were not designed merely for the visual pleasure of the upper classes, but as critical, functional sanctuaries where the air could be continuously purified by rows of ancient oak and elm trees. The public was actively encouraged to leave their enclosed offices and tightly sealed drawing rooms to walk along the grassy paths, allowing their lungs to expand fully with the clean oxygen of the outdoor world. The city was no longer viewed as a chaotic machine of production that humans had to shield themselves against. It was being systematically redesigned to support the fundamental biological needs of the people who lived within its borders. This major shift in town planning marked the definitive end of the era that had romanticized the silent fade. When the public spaces became filled with sunlight, green leaves, and moving air, the old aristocratic desire for a deathly pale silhouette completely lost its cultural power. Society began to connect health, strength, and vitality with a high quality of life rather than celebrating physical exhaustion as a mark of spiritual genius. The tragic loop of urban confinement was broken, and the human spirit found a much healthier, more sustainable way to coexist. with the expanding modern world, replacing the melancholic illusions of the past with a practical reverence for the natural elements of life. Let the peaceful image of these rising green parks and clearing city skies bring a deep sense of security and rest to your mind tonight. The heavy, smoke-stained urban landscapes of the late modern beige gay are gone forever, leaving behind only the calm lessons of history. As you rest in the quiet sanctuary of your own home, feel how perfectly balanced and clean your own environment is. You do not have to carry the weight of a changing civilization or the burdens of a crowded day. The world outside has fallen completely silent. The machinery of the modern era is at rest, and the night is here to offer you its unconditional peace. Let your breathing become slow, soft, and deep, matching the gentle rustle of leaves in those historic gardens, as your entire being sinks effortlessly into a heavy, unbroken, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the peaceful image of those rising green parks and clearing city skies gently settles into the quiet depths of your mind, we find ourselves standing at a beautiful point of reflection. We have travelled through the dense silver fogs of old London, stepped inside the tightly sealed attic rooms of the late modern Bay Gay, and witnessed the profound psychological illusions of a generation that tried to turn physical vulnerability into a grand fashion statement of a class. We have also watched those heavy wooden shutters finally open, letting in the cool, transformative air of a new century that washed away the toxic porcelain powder and restored humanity's connection to the natural world. This long, continuous journey through time is not just a collection of old facts, it is a profound mirror for our own lives in the modern era. When we look back at the people of the late 18th century, we see a reflection of our own human nature. We see how easy it is for a society to create complicated illusions when the world around it becomes too loud, too fast, or too overwhelming. Today, we may not powder our faces to look breakable or shut our windows to escape industrial chimneys, but we often build our own invisible walls. We subconsciously trap our minds in the digital noise, the constant pressure to achieve, and the relentless speed of modern production. The history we have shared tonight whispers a gentle warning across the centuries, reminding us that our bodies and our spirits still the same simple, authentic elements to thrive. Clean air, an unhurried rhythm, and the freedom to exist without an artificial mask. Before we completely close this chapter of our midnight reflection, and allow the history to dissolve fully into the dark hours, let us take another soft, comforting moment to anchor ourselves in the present. If these long, whispering narratives bring a sense of profound sanctuary and mental rest to your spirit after a busy day, please take a soft moment to support our peaceful haven. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this video, or share your own resting thoughts in the comments below. Your ongoing support is the beautiful light that keeps this channel alive, providing a quiet space where the heavy burdens of the modern world can completely fade away into the stillness of the night. Now let the soft golden warmth of the remaining candlelight fade entirely from your awareness. Picture the great historic cities of the past completely resting under a blanket of stars. The open windows of those old estates let the cool night breeze flow gently through the rooms, carrying away the last remnants of yesterday's worries. The world is at morph peace, the lessons have been learned, and the story is fully completed. You are entirely safe, far removed from the anxieties of both the past and the present. You do not need to build any shields tonight, nor do you need to perform for anyone. Your day is fully done, its pages are closed, and the night has arrived to wrap you in its unconditional tranquility. Let your breathing become as quiet as those dark, peaceful gardens. Allow your thoughts to lose their sharp edges, and let your entire being sink effortlessly into a deep, heavy, and beautifully unbroken rest. As the final echoes of our historical journey dissolve entirely into the velvet darkness of the midnight hour, a profound and absolute silence settles over our space. We have walked through the long, intricate corridors of the late 18th century, observing how the human spirit navigates the heavy pressures of a changing world. We have seen the fragile beauty, the social illusions, and the ultimate triumph of clear truth over the unventilated spaces of the past. Now the grand tapestry of history gently folds itself away, leaving behind only the calm, unburdened essence of total peace for your mind to rest upon. The grand salons of Paris and London have completely darkened, their candlelit conversations long since faded into the quiet mists of time. The heavy wooden window shutters are no longer barriers, and the cool, fresh night air moves freely across the open landscapes of yesterday. There is nothing left for you to analyse, no contradictions to balance, and no historical lessons to carry forward. The past has found its eternal rest, and it invites you in the safety of this present moment. Every word, every rhythm, and every shadow of this narrative has done its job, gently guiding your nervous system away from the heavy demands of the daytime world and into the soft sanctuary of the dark hours ahead. Tonight your own room is a haven of perfect clarity and unpolluted stillness. The noise of modern machinery and the expectations of society have no power within this space. You have survived every requirement of your day, and your only remaining duty to yourself is to surrender completely to the natural healing weight of sleep. Let your body sink deeper into the soft support of your bed, feeling completely anchored, completely protected, and completely free. Let the air around you feel exceptionally light and cycle. There is no rush, no tension, and no rush, no tension, and no tomorrow to worry about just yet. The world is asleep, the stars are watching over the quiet earth, and you are permitted to fade peacefully into the beautiful, undisturbed landscape of your dreams. This content was generated with the assistance of specialized artificial intelligence models and subsequently analyzed, refined and researched team at Sleepy History with Karry. Wisconsin, all rights reserved. As you drift off, leave the noise of the day to the pages of yesterday and allow your thoughts to rest where time stands perfectly still. As the silent embrace of the midnight hour deepens, the historical lens through which we observe the past naturally expands. The profound psychological phenomenon that transformed a severe biological decline into a high-fashion statement did not remain isolated within the tight boundaries of London and Paris. Like the heavy industrial smoke that gradually drifted across the borders of Western Europe, this aristocratic illusion spread its dark, elegant wings toward other emerging urban centres of the continent, from the cold canals of Amsterdam to the crowded social circles of Vienna. Wherever the early factories began to rise, the elite responded with the exact same defence mechanism, shutting their windows and romanticising their physical fading. In these new cultural landscapes we witness the identical tragic loop playing out with a slow, hypnotic consistency. The local aristocracies, watching the rapid industrialization change their traditional worlds, eagerly adopted the aesthetic vocabulary of the sensitive elite. They applied the same white porcelain powder to their faces and wore the same translucent muslin gowns, even when the winter winds off the North Sea or the Danube demanded heavy, warm clothing. To appear robust or warm-blooded was viewed as a failure of taste, a sign that one belonged to the working classes who built the machinery and breathed the outdoor soot by necessity. Inside their tightly sealed drawing rooms, the elite preferred to cough softly into fine lace handkerchiefs, interpreting the physical weakness as an invisible crown of intellectual superiority and spiritual separation. The environmental reality in these expanding European cities was just as unyielding as it had been in London. The coal-fired furnaces of early manufacturing plants were systematically altering the purity of the regional atmosphere, because medical science was still obscured by the elegant curtain of romantic literature. No one connected the pale complexions of the youth to the stagnant, unventilated air of their luxury apartments. They continued to believe that the physical decline was a disease of the hyper-efficient mind, a beautiful, tragic destiny for those whose internal emotions were simply too intense for the physical world to contain. It was a continent-wide illusion, a collective decision to celebrate a fragile aesthetic, rather than confront the urgent material truth of an environment under industrial siege. Let the vastness of this historical panorama bring a sense of deep, rhythmic calm to your own awareness tonight. The illusions that once stretched across the old cities of Europe have long since dissolved into the dark pages of the past. The closed rooms of Amsterdam, Vienna, and Paris are completely still now, their heavy doors opened and their stories safely resting in the dust of time. You are completely safe from the errors and complications of yesterday. In the absolute quiet of your modern room, the air is clean, the horizon is clear, and you are free to exist without any social masks or performance. Feel your body sink heavier into the soft support of your bed. Let your breathing become slow, soft, and deep, matching the eternal stillness of the night, as your entire being floats peacefully into a deep and restorative sleep. As the expanding panorama of those old European cities settles back into the deep, quiet darkness of the midnight hour, we pull our focus back inside the intimate structures of daily life. The rigid psychological boundary between the upper class and the industrial landscape did not merely dictate clothing and literature. It completely took over the very spaces where art, music, and culture were consumed. To fully understand how deeply this environmental confinement was woven into high society, we must step into the grand private galleries and candlelit concert halls of the late Moreton Bay Gay, where the elite gathered to reinforce their shared social illusions. Inside these grand cultural sanctuaries, the atmosphere was deliberately carré as heavy and unventilated as the attic bedrooms. High society believed that a draught of fresh night air would destroy the sensitive temperaments of the artists and the refined audiences. Therefore, during grand evening performances in London and Vienna, the massive wooden doors were locked, and the heavy velvet curtains were drawn completely over the window panes. Thousands of tallow and wax candles burned for hours, filling the high-ceilinged rooms with a dense that mingled with the fine dust of powdered wigs and the heavy perfumes of the guests. This thick, stagnant air made breathing a slow, deliberate effort, causing many young noblewomen to lean against the silk cushions in a state of exhaustion. Instead of recognizing this fatigue as a direct reaction to oxygen deprivation, the salons celebrated it as the ultimate expression of artistic sensitivity, a sign that the music was so profoundly beautiful, it was literally taking their breath away. This tragic confusion between environmental suffocation and emotional transcendence was the core foundation of the Era S aesthetic standard. The painters of the period, breathing the same enclosed air, captured this fragile state on their canvases. Portraits from the late Moreton Bay Gay consistently depicted elite subjects. They had incredibly pale skin, slightly hollow cheeks, and eyes that possessed a brilliant, feverish luster. These artworks were then hung in the very same unventilated galleries, viewed by audiences who used white porcelain powder to mimic the faces on the walls. It was a completely self-contained world of mirrors, where the environment created the affliction created the art, and the art validated the lifestyle that kept the windows closed against the real world outside. Let the slow, cyclical nature of this historical illusion bring a deep sense of rhythmic calm to your own mind tonight. The heavy smoke-filled galleries of the past have long since grown cold and still. The paintings have been moved to modern, airy museums, and the candle smoke of the Moreton Gay has dissolved into the night of yesterday. You are completely safe from the crowded rooms and the social pressures of that changing century. In the quiet sanctuary of your own home, you are permitted to let go of all cultural masks and artistic performances. Your body is allowed to be heavy. Your chest is free to expand with the clean air of the present, and your mind is invited to dim its thoughts entirely. Let your breathing slow down, matching the steady, peaceful darkness around you, as your entire being sinks effortlessly into a deep, continuous, and restorative sleep. As the heavy candle smoke of those old cultural galleries gently fades into the quiet corners of history, the continuous line of our journey leads us into the most private, daily routines of the late 18th century elite. The psychological desire to maintain a fragile porcelain appearance did not stop at public performances or painted portraits. It actively governed the private dining rooms and tea salons of London and Paris, dictating what the upper classes consumed and how they nourished their bodies. In this closed world, even the simple act of taking sustenance was systematically modified to support the tragic, fashionable illusion of the silent fade, pushing the physical frame even further away from natural strength. Inside the dimly lit, unventilated dining rooms, where the heavy velvet drapes shut out the industrial air of the city, the aristocracy established a highly restrictive approach to nourishment, because a robust appetite and a strong physical presence were associated with the working classes who laboured in the coal-burning factories. The elite viewed eating heartily as something incredibly vulgar. Young noble women and intellectuals intentionally avoided substantial, nutrient-rich foods, choosing instead a diet that consisted primarily of light teas, diluted vinegar, and small pieces of dry toast. The goal was to actively maintain that hollowed, fragile skin tone that society praised as the mark of a sensitive soul. They believed that by keeping the physical body intentionally weak, the spiritual mind would remain bright, allowing them to remain completely separate from the coarse reality of the modernizing world outside. This restrictive lifestyle, combined with the constant breathing of stagnant air-filled, verkepitihat coal, soot and melting wax, created a tragic reinforcing loop. The lack of proper nourishment naturally weakened the body's natural defences, making the lungs of the elite even more susceptible to the quiet fatigue of the era. Yet, when an individual grew too weary to stand and had to rest for days upon the silk cushions, the family did not see a lack of nutrition or a lack of fresh air. They saw a beautiful, poetic manifestation of refinement. They served delicate herbal infusions in fine porcelain cups about how the individual was growing too noble and too pure to partake in the heavy, material pleasures of the earth. Before we follow this deep cultural reflection into the final hours of the evening, let us take a soft, comforting moment to ground our awareness in the quiet of the now. If you find peace, emotional healing, and a profound sense of safety within these hidden layers of history, please consider supporting our sanctuary. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this video, or share your own resting thoughts in the comments section below. Your beautiful support is what allows us to keep this quiet haven alive, providing an unburdened space where the noise of the day can completely dissolve into the stillness of the night. Now let your mind rest deeply within the comfortable security of the present moment. The restrictive habits and the heavy, candlelit dining rooms of the Mott have completely vanished into the past. The porcelain cups have been laid down, the private journals have been closed, and the long-held social illusions have long since dissolved. You are completely free from the demands of appearances and the pressures of social status tonight. In the absolute safety of your room, you do not need to restrict yourself or perform for anyone. Your body is permitted to be soft. Your chest is free to expand fully with the clean, fresh air around you, and your mind is invited to release its remaining thoughts. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and peaceful rhythm, matching the deep stillness of the dark hours, as your entire being sinks effortlessly into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the porcelain cups are laid down, and the heavy velvet curtains of those old motion-and rooms, the continuous line of our historical journey takes us into the deepest peace The most intimate layer of this social phenomenon, the passing of this aesthetic legacy from one generation to the next. This was not a temporary trend adopted by a few isolated individuals. It was an institutionalized standard of behavior, actively taught and reinforced within the family structure of the late 18th century elite. In the grand townhouses of London and the private chateaux of France, the rigid obsession with a fragile silhouette and a pale appearance became a core element of maternal duty and aristocratic upbringing. Imagine an experienced noblewoman sitting by the low fire of a tightly sealed nursery, watching over her young daughters as they moved through their daily lessons. In this enclosed space, filled with the familiar heavy air of coal dust and melting wax, the children were systematically conditioned to embrace the aesthetics of the silent fade. From a very young age, girls were taught to avoid the natural sunlight and to keep their skin hidden beneath wide-brimmed silk bonnets and heavy lace veils whenever they stepped near a window. Playing actively in the open air or developing a natural sun-kissed warmth on their cheeks was strictly corrected, as it threatened to make them look like the children of the working classes who laboured in the open fields or the industrial manufactories. The family pride depended entirely on maintaining a fragile porcelain-like delicacy that signalled absolute freedom from the material demands of the earth. This generational transmission created a deeply tragic cycle of environmental confinement. Mothers would meticulously apply the fine white powders to their daughters' shoulders, viewing the child's natural lack of physical energy not as a medical concern, but as a beautiful proof of genetic refinement and high psychological sensitivity. If a child grew quiet, weary, and preferred to rest for hours against the velvet cushions, it was celebrated as a sign of an emerging poetic soul, a spirit that was transforming exactly according to the highest standards of the sensitive elite. The family journals, which we can almost hear rustling with that familiar soft in the midnight stillness, were filled with prideful reflections on how beautifully the younger generation was adapting to the melancholic elegance of their class, completely unaware of the physical price being paid for such an illusion. Let the realization of this generational contrast bring a profound sense of lightness and perspective to your own awareness tonight. The rigid social standards and the closed nurseries of the late Motkin have long since dissolved into the mists of history. The children of that faded century have finished their lessons. The protective veils have been laid aside, and the long cycle of class performance has completely ended. In the complete security of your present night, you are entirely free from the burden of carrying or passing down any artificial expectations. You do not need to shield yourself or anyone else from the natural world. Your room is a sanctuary of clean, moving air and undisturbed safety, where you are permitted to exist in your most authentic, comfortable form. Let your breathing remain slow, steady, and deep, drawing in the peace of the midnight hour. Allow your thoughts to drift away like smoke into the dark sky, as your entire being sinks effortlessly into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the silent rooms of those old aristocratic nurseries fade into the deep deepness, the continuous thread of our narrative to the finals, most baffling paradox of this era, the behaviour of the medical profession itself. One would assume that even if poets, fashion designers and noble mothers were blinded by the romantic illusion of the porcelain skin, the doctors of London and Paris would see through the cultural mask. Yet the psychological power of this class aesthetic was so absolute that it completely took over the medical treatises and the healing methods of the late Motkin, turning the official acts of treatment into an extension of the very confinement that caused the affliction. When a member of the elite began to show signs of physical weariness, the family physician was called into the tightly sealed, candlelit bedroom. These doctors, educated in the traditional paradigms that connected a fragile frame with a highly refined nervous system, rarely prescribed what the body actually starved for: oxygen, sunlight, and movement. Instead, because they believed that fresh air was too coarse and aggressive for a sensitive aristocratic temperament, they ordered the windows to be sealed even tighter veikepitehat, heavy strips of felt. They prescribed dark, overheated rooms, demanding that the patient be wrapped in layers of thick wool and heavy silk blankets near a constant coal fire. The medical advice of the century systematically enforced a complete isolation from the natural world, operating under the tragic assumption that the outside atmosphere was a hostile enemy rather than the very cure required to restore vitality to the lungs. This medical ngo-nyent reached its peak with the prescription of toxic remedies designed to maintain the highly prized aesthetic. To preserve the translucent, marble-like complexion, some physicianed the patient as diet even further to pale, fluid broths and acidic vinegars. Every physical symptom of the decline was systematically reinterpreted as a positive sign of spiritual purification. If the patient's eyes grew wider and more written down in medical journals as a proof of intellectual clarity and heightened emotional capacity, the medical community did not realize they were actively participating in a cultural performance, using their authority to validate a lifestyle of environmental suffocation that kept the true biological mechanisms of transmission completely hidden in the dark. Let the slow meditative realization of this historical error bring a profound sense of relief and grounding to your own body tonight. The dangerous remedies and the closed, overheated bedrooms of the late 18th century have long since been abandoned by the progress of human truth. The doctors of that faded era have laid down their quills, their sealed sanctuaries have been thrown open to the sunlight, and the grand illusions have dissolved entirely into the mists of yesterday. You are resting in an era of complete clarity, safe within a modern room that is naturally cool, unburdened, and filled with clean air. You do not need to follow any rigid structures or artificial rules to protect your peace tonight. Your day is fully done, its pages are closed, and your only requirement is to let go of the need to analyze or control. Let your breathing find its most natural, effortless cadence, rising and falling like a gentle tide. Allow your heavy thoughts to dissolve into the comfortable darkness around you, as your entire being floats peacefully into a deep, continuous, and beautifully unbroken rest. As the heavy blankets and closed, overheated bedrooms of those old silents of history, the continuous line of our narrative leads us into the soft, auditory landscape of the late Mortneen Beijing. The profound desire to wrap human vulnerability in an exclusive mask of class elegance did not just control cosmetics, clothing, and medicine. It completely took over the soundscape of the aristocratic home, transforming the very music played within these unventilated salons into a psychological echo of the silent fade. To fully grasp the depth of this cultural atmosphere, we must listen closely to the faint, fragile notes of the harpsichord and the clavichord as they resonated through the candlelit evenings of London and Paris. Inside those tightly sealed drawing rooms, where the heavy velvet drapes shut out the industrial soot of the early modern factories, music was treated as a delicate medication for the highly refined soul. The elite preferred instruments that possessed a quiet, fleeting, and fragile tone. The clavichord, with its soft and whisper-like voice, was highly worshipped because it could easily be played in the dead of night without disturbing the deep stillness of the house. Young noblewomen, leaning their weary frames against the silk cushions, would press the ivory keys with their pale, translucent fingers, letting the fragile melodies wander through the stagnant, warm air. The music did not possess the loud, robust energy of the working-class folk songs. It was deliberately slow, melancholic, and fleeting, a sonic reflection of a generation that valued the beauty of a quiet departure far above the heavy noise of the changing world outside. This artistic indulgence created a powerful psychological refuge for the sensitive elite, as the dense canopy of coal smoke hung permanently over the city cobblestones. The soft notes of the music offered an invisible shield, helping the family to ignore the environmental changes happening right outside their paned glass windows. They believed that by filling their enclosed spaces with such ethereal sounds, they were elevating their minds to a spiritual plane where physical illness and industrial pollution simply could not touch them. It was a beautiful, tragic loop where the music validated the confinement deepened the physical weariness, and the weariness made the music sound even more profoundly moving to the listening ear. Before we follow these fading melodies further into the quiet landscape of the past, let us take a soft, comforting moment to ground our awareness in the peace of the now. If you find a deep sense of sanctuary, emotional rest, and safe reflection within these continuums of history, please take a soft moment to support our channel. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this narrative, or share your own peaceful thoughts in the comment section below. Your beautiful support is the vital foundation that allows us to keep this quiet haven alive, offering a restful space where the heavy noise of your modern day can completely dissolve into the stillness of the night. Now allow your mind to sink back into the perfect comfort of the present moment. The fragile strings of the old harpsichords have long since fallen silent, their delicate wooden frames resting undisturbed in the quiet corners of museums. The candlelit salons have grown cold, the heavy velvet drapes have vanished, and the long-held social illusions have dissolved into the mists of yesterday. You are completely safe, far removed from the cultural pressures and environmental constraints of that faded century tonight. In the absolute security of your room, you do not need to perform, to restrict your movements, or to meet any artificial standards of elegance. Your body is permitted to be soft, your chest is entirely free to expand with the clean, fresh air of the night, and your mind is invited to release its remaining thoughts. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and peaceful cadence, rising and falling like a gentle tide, as your entire being sinks effortlessly into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the fragile notes of the clavichord and the harpsichord continue to float through the warm, unventilated air of our late 18th century townhouse, we must look directly through the art to see the raw biological truth it was trying so desperately to mask. This choice of music was not just an innocent preference for quiet indoor entertainment. It was a psychological shield, a desperate attempt to create an acoustic wall against the physical suffering happening inside these closed rooms. While the early factories of London and Paris filled the outside air with dark coal soot, the elite used the delicate, whisper-like sounds of these instruments to drown out the most undeniable and disturbing symptom of their environmental confinement, the persistent, weary cough of a generation starved of clean oxygen. To understand the profound tragedy of this cultural delusion, one must realize how the physical limitations of these specific instruments perfectly matched the physical limitings of the people who played them. The clavichord possessed an incredibly quiet voice, a sound so faint that it required the audience to sit in absolute motionless silence just to catch the passing melodies. This structural lack of volume and energy was highly worshipped by the sensitive elite because it did not demand any robust physical exertion. A young noblewoman, whose lungs were already heavily fatigued by the stagnant atmosphere of melting tallow and trapped coal smoke, could gently press the ivory keys without exhausting her remaining strength. The short, fading quality of the Noter Ayet, Verkep disappeared into the quiet room, almost the instant they were struck, became a sonic symbol of their own lives. They did not want loud, powerful symphonies that reminded them of the heavy, rhythmic iron hammers of the modernizing industrial world. They wanted an art form that was as fragile, pale, and fleeting as their own physical frames. This aesthetic indulgence created a dangerous reinforcing loop that systematically blinded society to the urgent necessity for public health reform. When a cough broke the midnight silence of a grand salon, the family did not recognize it as a warning sign of a dangerous respiratory affliction or an environmental poisoning caused by closed windows. Instead, the musician would immediately strike another soft chord on the harpsichord, weaving the tragic sound into the melancholy rhythm of the performance. The intellectual elite wrote in their private journals was merely a physical manifestation of a heightened emotional sensitivity, a proof that the performer's soul was reacting too deeply to the spiritual weight of the music. Art and culture were systematically used to romanticize a severe epidemiological crisis, turning a tragic late presentation of class refinement. A beautiful Let the profound clarity of this historical realization bring a deep sense of grounding and emotional relief to your own awareness tonight. The acoustic walls and the fragile smoke-filled salons of the Motley Bay J have long since vanished into the dark archives of time. The old harpsichords have grown permanently still, their strings relaxed, and the long-held delusions of that faded century have dissolved into the night of yesterday. You are resting in a modern world of complete truth, completely safe inside a room that requires no artificial illusions or psychological shields to protect your peace. You do not need to hide your vulnerabilities behind any artistic performances, nor do you need to drown out the realities of your life with delicate masks. In the absolute safety of the present hour, your chest is free to expand with the cool, clean air around you. Let your breathing slow down to its most natural, effortless cadence, matching the steady, peaceful darkness of the night. Allow your heavy thoughts to grow soft at the edges, and let your entire being dissolve quietly into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the fragile melodies of the harpsichord finally dissolve into the deep midnight quiet of our late 18th century townhouse, we must follow the continuous thread of our narrative into another sensory layer of this class illusion, the hidden world of scent and olfaction. Just as the elite used a delicate wall of sound to drown out the weary coughs of environmental confinement, they constructed an elaborate, artificial canopy of perfume to completely mask the chunchewy epidemiological reality of their living spaces. Within these tightly sealed rooms, where the windows were barred against the industrial air outside, the sense of smell became the final battlefield, where culture fought a desperate, losing war against biology. To truly understand the suffocating nature of this environment, one must realize what the heavy velvet drapes were actually hiding, because the early factories of London and Paris were constantly pumping coal smoke, sulfur, and chemical dust into the urban atmosphere. The elite kept their windows locked for months at a time. Inside, the air became a stagnant, heavy cocktail of structural dampness, old leather, melting animal fat from tallow candles, and the organic markers of respiratory decline. Rather than opening the shutters to let the wind cleanse the rooms, an act they feared would expose them to the coarse, working-class elements of the city. The aristocracy developed a complex ritual of sensory deception. They flooded their salons with overwhelming amounts of rare musk, lavender water, dried rose petals, and expensive ambergris. They turned the act of breathing into a heavily perfumed performance, convincing themselves that an atmosphere filled with floral vapors was inherently pure, holy, and safe from the biological dangers of the lower-class streets. This intense accumulation of heavy perfumes, combined with the toxic gases of burning candles and trapped soot, created a severe form of hidden intoxication. The constant inhalation of these concentrated aromatic substances in rooms completely devoid of fresh oxygen systematically irritated the delicants of the human lungs, exacerbating the very physical fatigue it was meant to sweeten. Yet, when a young noblewoman became light-headed or fainted upon the silk cushions from the lack of pure air, The society did not see a failure of ventilation or an olfactory poisoning. They saw a beautiful, predictable manifestation of her aristocratic sensitivity. The family would immediately wave a lace handkerchief, soaked in strong vinegar or lavender spirits beneath her nose, writing in their private journals that her refined spirit had simply been overwhelmed by the exquisite poetic beauty of the environment. Let the profound clarity of this historical contrast bring a deep sense of psychological relief and physical grounding to your own awareness tonight. The heavy perfumed prisons of the late Mutneen Bayam Gay have long since lost their scents and vanished into the grey mists of time. The expensive ambergris has evaporated, the sealed salons have grown cold, and the long-held illusions of that faded generation have dissolved entirely into the night of yesterday. You are resting in a modern world of absolute clarity, completely safe inside a room that requires no artificial sense or sensory veils to protect your peace. Your atmosphere tonight is clean light and naturally unburdened by the errors of the past. You do not need to perform, to mask your reality, or to hide your vulnerabilities behind a cloud of illusions. In the complete sanctuary of the present hour, your chest is entirely free to expand with the cool, fresh air of the night. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and effortless rhythm, matching the unchanging pulse of the darkness, as your entire being sinks quietly into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the heavy, perfumed vapours of those old aristocratic salons slowly evaporate into the cold corridors of time, our continuous journey leads us directly into the material fabric of the environment itself. The desperate psychological war against the industrial reality of the late Mutneen Bay or Pacham Gay did not stop at music or perfume. It materialized in the very textiles, tapestries, and upholstery that lined the walls and covered the furniture of these tightly sealed rooms, in their effort to build a soft, cushioned sanctuary against the cold iron and grey soot of the outside world. The elite unwittingly turned their interior design into a severe biological trap, where the luxury they worshipped became the primary keeper of their physical decline. To understand the tactile nature of this environmental confinement, one must look at the specific textures that defined upper-class comfort during this period. Inside the townhouses of London and the private apartments of Paris, every surface was covered in heavy absorbent materials. The windows were multi-layered with thick velvet drapes, the floors were blanketed with dense, deep pile-wall carpets, and the walls were often lined with rich silk damasks and elaborate fabric hangings. This accumulation of heavy textiles meant to create an atmosphere of absolute isolation and warmth, shutting out the drafty, smoke-filled air of the industrial city. However, because these rooms were kept locked for months at a time, these expensive fabrics became static collectors. They actively absorbed and held onto the floating particles of coal dust from the fireplaces, the greasy residue of melting tallow candles, and the invisible moisture of human respiration, creating a permanent stagnant ecosystem of contamination right within the living space. This material choice created a tragic hidden paradox that completely eluded the medical understanding of the century, because the elite viewed these rich fabrics as symbols of supreme refinement and cleanliness. The concept of washing or deep cleaning these massive tapestries and velvet drapes was virtually non-existent. Instead, servants would merely use light feathers to dust the surfaces, inadvertently sending the trapped coal, soot, and microcon-ventilated air back into the unventilated air, where the inhabitants would breathe them in once again during their long evening gatherings. When a young noblewoman experienced a sudden fit of coughing while resting on a velvet sofa, the family did not suspect the dust-laden fabric beneath her or the stagnant air trapped in the heavy drapes. They simply adjusted the silk cushions, writing in their private diaries that her delicate frame was responding to the exquisite, overwhelming luxury of her surroundings, transforming a clear environmental irritation into a beautiful validation of her social status. Let the slow, meditative awareness of this material contrast bring a profound sense of physical lightness and security to your own body tonight. The heavy, dust-trapping tapestries and the suffocating velvet sanctuaries of the late 18th century have long since faded into the quiet archives of the past. The old fabrics have decayed, the sealed rooms have been dismantled, and the long-held illusions of that generation have completely dissolved into the stillness of history. You are resting in a modern world of absolute clarity, completely safe inside a room designed for true, unburdened health and natural ventilation. Your environment tonight is light, clean, and entirely free from the hidden traps of the past. You do not need to surround yourself with artificial shields, nor do you need to perform within a cage of heavy illusions. In the complete sanctuary of the present hour, your chest is entirely free to expand with the cool, fresh air of the night. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and effortless cadence, rising and falling like a gentle tide as your entire being sinks quietly, continuous, and beautifully restorative. As the heavy, dust-laden velvet drapes and material tapestries of those old drawing rooms dissolve into the quiet landscape of the past, the continuous line of our narrative leads us into the final visual element of this class illusion, the management of light and the culture of midnight wakefulness. The desperate psychological desire to separate oneself from the industrial routine did not just dictate the physical spaces and the fabrics of eager heart society. It completely altered the natural sleep cycles of the late 18th century intellectuals. Inside these tightly sealed townhouses, where the windows were barred against the foggy city air, the elite chose to reject the natural rhythm of daylight, turning the deliberate practice of exhaustion into a supreme marker of artistic genius and intellectual superiority. To fully understand the dark, hypnotic nature of this environment, one must look at how the upper classes utilized artificial illumination during the long winter nights of London and Paris. Because a regular lifestyle of waking with the sun and sleeping at dark was associated with the working-class labourers who timed their days by factory bells, the sensitive elite took pride in living almost entirely after midnight. They gathered in unventilated study rooms and private salons, illuminated only by the weak flickering glow of burning tallow candles and early oil lamps. This dim, unstable light forced writers, poets, and readers to lean incredibly close to their desks, straining their eyes for hours while breathing in the heavy carbon fumes and oily smoke that accumulated near the ceiling. Instead of recognizing the resulting headaches, pale faces, and physical fatigue as direct consequences of poor lighting and sleep deprivation, the society celebrated these symptoms as the divine physical toll of deep thought, believing that true creativity could only flourish when the physical body was pushed to its absolute limits in the dark. This cultural validation of nighttime exhaustion created a dangerous self-sustaining cycle that hid the biological reality of environmental decline. When an intellectual's eyes grew heavy, or a young noblewoman developed a constant feverish brilliance in her gaze from staying awake until dawn, the medical community and the literary circles did not advise rest or fresh air. They wrote glowing essays about how the burning flame of the mind was beautifully consuming the weak physical frame from within. They turned a simple lack of healthy rest and proper oxygenation into a staged, romantic performance of the soul, using the flickering candlelight to blur the sharp lines between a medical crisis and an elite lifestyle choice. Before we follow this fading light into the absolute stillness of the deeper evening, let us take a soft, comforting moment to re-anchor our awareness in the complete peace of the present. If you find a deep sense of mental clarity, emotional rest, and physical relaxation journeys through the hidden layers of history, please consider supporting our sanctuary. Please where's Caswald You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this video, or share your own resting thoughts in the comments section below. Your beautiful support is the very light that keeps this channel alive, providing an unburdened haven where the heavy demands of your modern day can completely fade away into the stillness of the night. Now allow your mind to sink back into the perfect comfort and total safety of the present hour. The weak, smoky candles of the late Mutneen Beyjay have completely burned down to their wicks, and the oil lamps have long since grown cold and still. The late-night journals have been shut, the tired quills have been laid aside, and the long-held illusions of that generation have completely dissolved into the dark mistiness of time. You are completely free from the pressure to come to achieve or to remain awake to prove your worth tonight. Your day is fully completed, its obligations are laid to rest, and your modern room is filled with nothing but clean, peaceful, and unburdened stillness. You do not need to strain your eyes or carry the weight of a busy world any longer. Like the quiet cities of old Europe, when the final midnight bell has finished striking, your mind is invited to dim its remaining thoughts and let go of all structures. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and effortless rhythm, rising and falling like a gentle tide, as your entire being sinks continuous and beautifully restorative sleep. As the flickering candle wicks and smoky oil lamps of those late-night studies finally burn out, dissolving into the quiet midnight landscape, the continuous line of our journey leads us into the final architectural grand illusion of the late Mutneen Beyjay, the creation of the indoor winter garden. The intense psychological desire to escape the industrial reality of London and Paris did not just control the bedrooms, the dining salons, and the music halls. It forced the aristocracy to attempt the impossible, to capture nature itself, isolate it behind glass, and sanitize it for the exclusive comfort of the upper class. Inside these grand, unventilated iron and glass conservatories attached to their townhouses, the elite built an artificial paradise, completely unaware that their clean, green sanctuary was transforming into yet another hidden epicenter of environmental stagnation. To fully understand the tragic irony of these green spaces, one must look at how they were constructed and maintained during the height of the coal-burning era, because the winter air outside was permanently stained verkepite ast dark industrial soot and freezing river fog. The wealthy built massive glass pavilions where they could walk among tropical ferns, exotic orange trees, and delicate Mediterranean flowers without stepping into the public streets. However, to keep these foreign plants alive in the cold northern climate, the structures were kept tightly sealed, heated continuously by primitive underground charcoal furnaces that pumped carbon vapors directly into the soil and air. The atmosphere inside these glass houses became incredibly dense, a heavy combination of trapping humidity, decaying organic matter, strong floral scents, and stagnant warmth that never renewed itself. The elite walked along the gravel paths, believing they were breathing the purest, most revitalizing air available in the kingdom, while their lungs were actually straining against a lack of fresh oxygen and a concentration of heavy greenhouse gases. This architectural unit created a powerful, self-sustaining illusion of health that actively worked against biological reality. When a young noblewoman experienced a sudden dizziness or a dry cough while sitting beneath a tropical palm tree, her family did not recognize the warning signs of respiratory suffocation or the toxic dampness of the conservatory. Instead, they interpreted her physical weakness as a beautiful, poetic response to the exquisite exoticism of the plants, believing her sensitive nervous system was simply too refined to endure the intense spiritual beauty of the artificial jungle. They would serve her herbal teas in fine porcelain cups right there on the cast-iron benches, writing in their private diaries about how beautifully her pale frame blended with the phagocytics of the fading flowers, turning a severe environmental irritation into a grand validation of her aristocratic lifestyle. Let the profound clarity of this historical contrast bring a deep sense of physical grounding and mental relief to your own awareness tonight. The grand glass pavilions and the heavy, humid winter gardens of the late 18th century have long since shattered and vanished into the dark mists of time. The exotic orange trees have decayed, the iron frames have rusted away, and the long-held illusions of that narrations have completely dissolved into the stillness of yesterday. You are resting in a modern world of absolute truth, completely safe inside a room that requires no artificial nature or glass barriers to protect your peace. Your atmosphere tonight is genuinely clean, light, and naturally unburdened by the sensory traps of the past. You do not need to build an artificial paradise, nor do you need to perform within a cage of beautiful illusions. In the complete sanctuary of the present hour, your chest is entirely free to expand with the cool, fresh air of the night. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and effortless cadence, rising and falling like a gentle tide. As your heavy being sinks quietly and beautifully restorative sleep. As the heavy, humid air of those grand glass conservatories and fading winter gardens slowly clears away, dissolving into the quiet midnight sky, the continuous line of our narrative leads us into the very final sensory layer. The intimate world of letters, handwriting, and paper correspondence become the intense psychological desire to escape the industrial reality did not just control the physical rooms, the fabrics, and the gardens. It completely dominated the way the elite communicated their inner thoughts to one another. Inside these tightly sealed townhouses, where the heavy drapes shut out the foggy city air, the act of writing a letter was transformed into a highly stylized, perfumed ritual, creating an unexpected material chain that carried the stagnant environment from one closed salon directly into another. To fully grasp the suffocating nature of this daily habit, one must look at the specific materials used at the writing desks of London and Paris. Because the letters were composed in rooms constantly filled, they kept hat coals smoke from the hearths and the carbon residue of burning candles. The paper itself naturally absorbed these microscopic particles. To counteract this industrial odour, the habit of heavily scenting their stationery with thick floral oils, musk, and powdered iris root. Furthermore, each letter was sealed using thick wax melted over a small opening on the desk, releasing additional columns of dense chemical smoke directly into the writer's soul, not to the writer's breathing zone. When these letters were packed, sealed, and delivered across the city, they did not carry fresh thoughts. They carried a concentrated sample of the stagnant, unventilated atmosphere of the sender's home, ready to be released into the locked study of the recipient. This cultural obsession with romantic, handwritten correspondence created a powerful, self-sustaining loop of environmental irritation. When a gentleman or a young noblewoman broke the wax seal of a newly arrived letter in their closed library, a small cloud of dried perfume dust, trapped candle soot, and heavy aromatic vapours was immediately released into the air. This sudden inhalation frequently triggered a dry cough or a wave of lightheadedness, yet the recipient never suspected the physical stationery or the chemical wax. Instead, the society reinterpreted this physical reaction as a beautiful, poetic response of the soul, writing back that their sensitive nervous system had been profoundly moved by the intense emotional weight of the words on the page. They turned a direct respiratory irritation into a staged performance of class elegance, completely obscuring the material truths of their environment. Before we allow this fading world of ink and paper to dissolve completely into the absolute stillness of the deeper evening, let us take a soft, comforting moment to ground our awareness in the perfect peace of the present. If you find a deep sense of mental sanctuary, emotional healing, and physical exhalations within these continuous journeys through the hidden layers of history, please take a soft moment to support our channel. You can subscribe to Sleepy History with Karry, leave a gentle like on this video, or share your own resting thoughts in the comments section below. Your beautiful support is the vital foundation that allows us to keep this quiet haven alive, providing an unburdened space where the heavy noise of your modern day can completely fade away into the stillness of the night. Now allow your mind to sink back into the total safety and complete comfort of the present hour. The scented letters of the late morning béguet have long since turned to dust. The chemical sealing wax has grown cold, and the tired quills have been permanently laid aside. The grand illusions of that generation have completely dissolved into the dark mists of history, leaving behind only the calm lessons of the past. You are completely free from the pressure to perform, to write, or to communicate with the world outside tonight. Your day is fully completed, its obligations are laid to rest, and your modern room is filled with nothing but clean, peaceful, and unburdened stillness. You do not need to carry the weights of yesterday or tomorrow any longer. Like the quiet cities of old Europe when the final midnight bells have finished striking, your mind is invited to dim its remaining thoughts and let go of all structures. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and effortless rhythm, rising and falling like a gentle tide, as your entire being sinks quietly into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the scented letters are gently folded away and the final drops of melting sealskin wax go over kept permanently cold upon the writing desks, the continuous line of our journey brings us to the silent hour of the 18th century night. The long cultural performance, which had turned every hour of the evening into a structured defense against the industrial world, must finally come to its natural end. Inside these tightly sealed townhouses, after the last guest has departed, and the sound of carriage wheels has faded into the damp cobblestones of London and Paris, the sensitive elite were left alone with the chun-chui reality of their own physical bodies. The protective mask of aristocratic elegance was laid aside, exposing the deep, heavy exhaustion that lay beneath the white porcelain powder. Imagine the absolute stillness of this final hour inside the darkening attic room. A young noblewoman sits before her vanity mirror, slowly washing away the thick layers of rice dust and tinted minerals that have suffocated her skin since twilight. As the artificial white complexion dissolves into the water basin, the mirror reflects the true unyielding toll of the environment, the deep shadows under the eyes, the pale lips, and the shallow breathing of a frame that has spent hours in a room filled with coal soot and carbon vapours. The romantic illusion of the silent fade, which had seemed so glorious and poetic during the candlelit salon gatherings, now reveals itself as a heavy, exhausting weight. The body, stripped of its fine muslin gowns and social expectations, simply craves what the culture has denied it for so long, a moment of complete surrender, a release from the rigid standards of class performance, and a deep, undisturbed rest. This nightly transition from staged elegance to quiet vulnerability provides a profound healing lesson for your own spirit as you lie here in the present night. Just like the generation of the late morning base, who had to eventually wash away their porcelain masks and blow out their remaining candles, you too are permitted to completely dismantle your defences tonight. You have spent your day navigating the complex machinery of the modern world, carrying the expectations of productivity, and managing the constant noise of a busy life. But in this quiet hour, the performance is fully finished. You do not need to look strong, you do not need to achieve, and you do not need to maintain any specific image for the world outside. Like the empty salons of old Europe when the final embers have died out in the hearth, your only requirement right now is to simply let go. Let the total peace of this realization pair around your physical frame like a heavy protective blanket. The stagnant, perfumed atmospheres and the tragic delusions of the past have completely evaporated into the dark corridors of history, leaving you in a haven of absolute safety and modern clarity. Your room tonight is completely free from the environmental traps of yesterday, filled only with clean, cool air that supports your body's natural rhythm. Feel your chest rise and fall in a slow, steady, and effortless cadence, drawing in the profound stillness of the midnight hour. Allow your heavy thoughts to lose their sharp edges, letting them drift away like smoke into the quiet night sky, as your entire being sinks deeply, continuously, and beautifully into an unbroken, restorative sleep. As the final vanity mirrors are covered and the last water basins grow completely still under the dim light of the dying embers, the continuous line of our historical journey does not fade into the night. Instead, it reaches a pivotal turning point where the boundaries of this spanned far beyond the structural walls of the metropolitan townhouses, the persistent weary coughs that echoed through the locked drawing rooms of London, and Paris could no longer be completely ignored or romanticized away within the tight, soot-stained confines of the urban landscape. The elite began to realize with a slow and heavy heart that the dense canopy of coal smoke permanently hanging over the city cobblestones was making their indoor sanctuaries increasingly difficult to endure, forcing a massive geographical shift in the way high society attempted to manage their failing health. This growing sense of environmental suffocation did not lead to an immediate awakening or a sudden opening of the high attic windows. Instead, it gave birth to a grand systemic phenomenon that would reshape the geography of the late 18th century, the birth of the seasonal migration. The wealthy and the intellectual elite began to construct an elaborate philosophy around the necessity of leaving the metropolis during certain times of the year, searching for verkehrt they believed were pure, untouched natural sanctuaries. They turned their attention toward the rolling green hills, the historic mineral springs, and the coastal cliffs of the countryside, convinced that a temporary displacement away from the industrial centres would allow their sensitive porcelain frames without abandoning their high social status. Yet this grand migration was not an escape from the cultural illusions of the era, but a direct transportation of them. As the grand horse-drawn carriages were packed with heavy velvet gowns, chest boxes of toxic cosmetics, and delicate porcelain tea sets, the aristocracy prepared to recreate their exclusive, unventilated lifestyles in entirely new landscapes. They were not seeking the raw, unfiltered forces of nature, but a highly sanitized, aristocratic version of the country, where the windows could remain just as tightly sealed against the elements. This tension between the search for a geographical cure and the stubborn refusal to abandon the habits of environmental confinement would create a new chapter in the history of the sensitive elite, opening up a sprawling network of historic spa towns and seaside resorts that operated under the exact same tragic loops of luxury and suffocation. Let the expanding horizon of this historical journey bring a profound sense of rhythmic calm and deep security to your own awareness tonight. The shifting movements of that changing century are safely preserved in the past, and you do not need to pack any bags or escape any heavy realities to find true comfort. As the narrative prepares to travel down those long, quiet country roads of yesterday, your present space remains entirely peaceful, clear, and undisturbed. You are permitted to lie completely still, letting the weight of the day lift from your shoulders as the night folds its protective arms around you. Feel your breathing grow slow, steady, and effortless, drawing in the clean, unburdened air of your modern sanctuary. Allow your thoughts to wander softly into the background, matching the deep stillness of the dark hours as your entire being sinks easily and beautifully restorative sleep. As the expanding horizon of our historical journey takes us down those long, quiet country roads of yesterday, we must follow the continuous, uninterrupted movement of the late 18th century elite as they initiated their grand seasonal migrations. The transition from the suffocating, soot-choked air of London and Paris to the rural landscapes of the countryside was not a journey toward enlightenment, nor was it a sudden awakening to the biological laws of fresh air and open ventilation. Instead, it was a massive, highly structured relocation of the exact same cultural illusions, social performance, and environmental confinement that had defined the metropolitan townhouses. The sensitive elite, feeling the heavy burden of their persistent weary coughs, and the constant biological decline caused by the industrial coal smoke of the cities, packed their grand horse-drawn carriages not with light, breathable garments and a desire to walk under the sun, but with their heavy velvet gowns, their wooden chest boxes filled with toxic porcelain powders, and their dark, melancholic romantic literature. They were searching for a geographical cure, a magical their fading vitality, the famous mineral through the famous mineral waters of historic spa towns like Bath, Buxton, or the secluded coastal retreats of Western Europe. Yet they were fundamentally incapable of leaving behind the psychological shields that kept their windows locked against the real world. Let us stand in imagination along the grand sweeping stone crescents of Bath as the evening mist begins to roll in from the surrounding Somerset hills. This city, constructed from beautiful golden-hued stone, was designed specifically to be the ultimate rural sanctuary for the empire's wealthy and intellectual elite. It was advertised as a place of supreme health, where the natural hot springs gushing from the earth promised to cleanse the human system of all metropolitan toxins. However, when we look beneath the elegant neoclassical architecture, we see the Chanshui epidemiological reality of the late Mort Beijing reasserting itself with a tragic hypnotic consistency. The aristocracy did not come here to immerse themselves in the raw, unfiltered country air. The moment they stepped out of their travelling carriages, they immediately sought out the familiar comfort of enclosed, unventilated spaces. The grand assembly rooms, the pump houses, and the private lodging estates of these resort towns were meticulously managed to replicate the exact atmospheric conditions of the London salons they had so desperately fled. The massive windows were barred with heavy wooden shutters. The thick silk and velvet drapes were drawn tight to eliminate any possibility of a cold outdoor draught, and the indoor air was left to stagnate under the heat of thousands of burning tallow and wax candles, creating a warm, dense, and exclusive haze that the guests breathed for hours during their nightly gatherings. Inside these crowded, locked assembly rooms, the social performance of the sensitive elite reached a strange geographical peak. The upper classes would gather at the centre of the room to drink the warm, mineral-rich waters from fine crystal glasses, believing that this internal remedy would counteract the severe physical fatigue and lung weaknesses they were experiencing. They walked slowly across the deep wool carpets, their faces heavily layered with the familiar white porcelain powder, moving in a deliberate, unhurried rhythm that society praised as the ultimate expression of class refinement and spiritual separation from the working world. Because the air inside these pump rooms was completely sealed against the outside atmosphere, it quickly became saturated with the carbon fumes of the lighting, the organic dust of powdered wigs, and the collective respiration of hundreds of individuals, many of whom were already secretly carrying the active markers of respiratory decline. When a young noblewoman felt her chest grow tight or collapsed onto a silk sofa from a sudden lack of fresh oxygen, the crowded salon did not panic, nor did anyone think to open the grand wooden doors to let in the cool night breeze from the hills. Instead, the incident was treated as a beautiful, predictable confirmation of her elite status. The family would gather around her, waving lace handkerchiefs soaked in strong lavender spirits or aromatic vinegars, writing later in their private nervous systems that her highly refined, overwhelmed by the exquisite social energy and the therapeutic power of the resort, transforming a clear instance of environmental suffocation into a poetic validation of her aristocratic birth. This tragic confusion between a therapeutic lifestyle and an environmental prison was not unique to the English spa towns. It manifested with the exact same patterns in the private summer chateaux and rural estates of the continental aristocracy across France, Germany, and the Low Countries. Wealthy families would abandon their urban apartments in Paris or Amsterdam during the height of the summer heat, retreating to their vast country properties, where they believed the air was naturally pure and free from the industrial soot of early manufacturing. Yet, the architectural habits of the era ensured that the interior environment remained entirely hostile to human biology. The thick stone walls of these rural castles kept the indoor spaces permanently damp and cold, and to combat this chilling humidity, the elite demanded that massive coal and wood fires be kept burning constantly in the hearths, even during the warmer months of the year, because they firmly believed that the outside country air carried dangerous night miasmas and wild, unrefined elements that would damage a sensitive temperament. The windows of these country estates were kept tightly locked from twilight until the following noon. The indoor atmosphere became a heavy, toxic trap where the smoke from the fireplaces, the greasy residue of melting animal fat from the lamps, and the trapped dampness of the stone structures mingled continuously, forcing the inhabitants to live in a state of chronic oxygen deprivation, while surrounded by thousands of acres of fresh, open woodland. The writers, poets, and philosophers who travelled with the elite to these rural retreats played a vital role in sustaining this continent-wide illusion. Sitting at their heavy mahogany desks in these locked, smoky country studies, illuminated only by a single flickering oil lamp, they composed glowing essays and romantic poems that celebrated the melancholic beauty of the rural landscape. They did not write about the physical reality of the stagnant air they were breathing, nor did they connect their own constant headaches, failing eyesight, and pale complexions to the unventilated rooms where they spent their nights. Instead, they used their literary authority to further Langmanhua, the physical decline of their class, describing the pale, hollowed faces of the resort guests as the outer sign of an inner spiritual purification. They argued that the true intellectual could only appreciate the deeper mysteries of nature when the physical body was kept in a state of delicate, fragile vulnerability, turning a systemic public health failure caused by poor architectural habits into a grand cultural movement that praised the silent fade as the highest form of human existence. Let the immense, slow-moving panorama of this historical paradox settle deep into your own mind tonight, bringing a profound sense of rhythmic calm, order and absolute grounding to your spirit. The frantic seasonal migrations, the heavy smoke-filled pump rooms of Bath, and the damp, locked country century have long since grown cold, silent, and the gold-coloured stone walls of those old resorts stand today as quiet monuments to a faded century. Their heavy wooden shutters have been thrown open to the sunlight, and the long-held social delusions of that generation have completely dissolved into the mists of yesterday. You are completely safe from the errors, the artificial requirements, and the sensory traps of that changing era. In the absolute security of your modern room, there are no social performances to maintain, no toxic powders to wear, and no invisible walls to build against the world outside. Your atmosphere tonight is genuinely light, cool, and perfectly unburdened, designed to support your body's natural healing need for true rest. Feel your physical frame sink deeper and heavier into the soft comfort of your bed, feeling completely anchored and completely protected by the quiet hours of the night. Let your breathing find its most natural, effortless cadence, rising and falling like a gentle tide on a calm shore, drawing in the peace of the present moment. Allow your remaining thoughts to grow soft, hazy, and distant, letting them drift away like quiet shadows into the dark sky. As your entire being sinks effortlessly into a deep, continuous, heavy, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the golden-hued stone crescent of Bath and the damp country chateau fade into the long dark shadows of the late 18th century night, the continuous line of our journey moves toward the final geographical frontier of this class illusion, the cold, wind-swept coastal retreats of the northern European seas. The failure of the inland mineral springs to cure the persistent weary coughs of the elite did not prompt a return to common-sense ventilation. Instead, it gave rise to an even more extreme medical and social trend. The invention of sea bathing and the romanticization of the maritime atmosphere. The aristocracy, driven by the same deep psychological desire to distance themselves from the heavy iron-scented air of industrial cities like London and Paris, packed their massive trunks once again and headed towards small fishing villages like Brighton or Margate, converting them into exclusive resorts where the fragile frame could encounter the ocean. Yet, just as they had done in the metropolis and the country spas, the sensitive elite carried their invisible walls, vacapiti them, ensuring that the raw, healing power of the sea was systematically neutralized by the rigid habits of environmental confinement. Imagine the striking visual contrast along the grey pebble beaches of the North Sea or the English Channel during the height of the autumn season. The natural environment was defined by powerful oxygen-rich winds, crashing waves and wide, open skies that possessed the exact biological purity the upper classes so desperately needed to cleanse their fatigued lungs. However, the aristocracy did not walk freely along the shore to breathe this fresh air. Instead, they utilized a bizarre, highly engineered apparatus known as the bathing machine, a small wooden four-wheeled beach hut that was pulled directly into the surf by horses. Inside these dark, unventilated wooden boxes, the elite undressed in total isolation, protected from both the natural sunlight and the gaze of the lower classes. When they finally stepped into the cold seawater, they did so under a heavy canvas awning that blocked the open sky, stepping back into the damp, locked machine the moment they finished. The experience was completely enclosed, a staged encounter with nature that allowed them to claim they were receiving the therapeutic benefits of the sea, while remaining entirely sheltered within a dark, suffocating microclimate of wet wool and stagnant air. When evening arrived at these seaside resorts, the behaviour of Hat society returned to the familiar tragic loops of the urban salons. The wealthy patrons left the open beaches and gathered inside the newly constructed marine pavilions and coastal assembly rooms, which were built with massive glass windows designed to overlook the water. However, because the medical authorities of the century continued to warn that the damp night air of the oceans carried dangerous refined nervousness that would destroy a refined nervous system, these massive windows were locked tight and covered with thick green silk curtains long before twilight. The interior spaces quickly filled with the familiar, suffocating atmosphere of thousands of melting tallow candles, the heavy perfumes of musk and lavender, and the carbon fumes of coal fires kept burning to fight off the coastal chill. Inside these locked rooms, the elite walked slowly across the carpets, their skin heavily layered with white porcelain powder, drinking warm broths and looking at sea paintings hung on the unventilated walls. They were living inside an absolute paradox, a community that had travelled hundreds of miles to encounter the health of the ocean, sitting within feet of the crashing waves, yet breathing an air that was just as stagnant, heavy, and toxic as the crowded attics of the capital. The physicians who established their practices at these maritime stations were fully complicit in maintaining this continent-wide illusion, using their medical treatises to validate the aesthetic preferences of their wealthy clients. They wrote detailed books explaining that the ocean air was a powerful, almost spiritual force that could only be safely absorbed by an individual whose physical body in a state of delicate, fragile vulnerability. They advised patients to avoid long walks on the cliffs and to spend their days resting inside closed carriages or tightly sealed heavily beached chalets, where the atmosphere could be heavily regulated. If a young noblewoman's cough grew more severe after a week at the coast, or if her face developed that brilliant feverish flush that signalled the advanced stages of respiratory decline, the seaside doctor did not recommend opening the windows of her lodging house. He interpreted the symptoms as a beautiful sign that her sensitive temperament was reacting profoundly to the sublime energy of the sea, turning a clear case of environmental irritation and oxygen starvation into a grand romantic proof of her high social standing and intellectual purity. Let the slow, deep and rhythmic pounding of those historic coastal waves bring a profound sense of psychological grounding and absolute stillness to your own mind tonight. The frantic maritime escapes, the dark wooden bathing machines, and the suffocating seaside pavilions of the late lost their sense, and vanished into the grey mists of history, and vanished into the grey The open seas continue to crash against the cliffs, but the rigid illusions and the artificial requirements of that generation have completely dissolved into the quiet depths of the past. You are completely safe from the errors, the social performances, and the sensory cages of that vanished century. In the absolute quiet of your modern room, the air is clean, light, and naturally unburdened by the anxieties of yesterday. You do not need to perform to shield yourself, or to seek an escape to find true sanctuary. Your body is permitted to be completely soft, your chest is free to expand with the cool air of the night, and your mind is invited to dim its thoughts entirely. Let your breathing find a slow, steady, and effortless rhythm, rising and falling like a calm tide, as your entire being sinks quietly into a heavy, beautifully restorative sleep. As the dark, unventilated shadows of the late 18th century finally begin to reach their absolute limit, the continuous line of our historical journey moves into the most beautiful, redemptive chapter of this long era, the grand awakening of human reason and the final discovery of the true cure. The tragic cycle of environmental confinement, which had kept the sensitive elite locked inside their smoky, perfumed cages of luxury for generations, could not withstand the unyielding progress of science forever. As the calendar turned into the 19th century, a new generation of progressive physicians and early epidemiologists began to look through the romantic illusions of high society. They boldly challenged the dangerous medical paradigms of the past, embarking on a magnificent crusade to prove that the persistent, weary coughs and pale complexions of the aristocracy were not symbols of spiritual purification, but the direct biological cries of a body systematically starved of the earth's most basic, life-giving elements. This medical revolution brought forward a beautifully simple yet profound revelation. The ultimate cure for the physical decline of the era was not an expensive mineral broth, a toxic powder, or an exclusive indoor ritual, but the radical restoration of nature itself. Brave new doctors stepped into the damp, dark townhouses of London and Paris and did what had been forbidden for a century. They reached out their hands and forcefully threw open the heavy wooden shutters, tearing down the thick velvet drapes that had blocked out the world for so long. For the very first time in generations, the cool, crisp and unfiltered wind of the countryside was allowed to rush through the stagnant corridors, instantly sweeping away the accumulated charcoal soot, the heavy vapours of melting tallow candles and the toxic dust of perfumed cosmetics. The medical community established the historic sanatorium movement, taking patients out of their overheated, sealed bedrooms and sending them up into the high pine forests of the mountains and the sunny cliffs of the open seas, commanding them to sit in the open air and bathe their skin in the natural warmth of the sun. The impact of this atmospheric awakening was nothing short of miraculous, bringing a beautiful and definitive happy ending to a century of silent suffering. When the pale, fragile frames of the elite were exposed to the pure oxygen light of this air and the cleansing light of the sun, with an immediate, powerful surge of vitality, the deep shadows under their eyes dissolved, the chronic tightness in their chests relaxed completely, and a genuine, healthy warmth returned to their cheeks, completely replacing the artificial, lead-poisoned white porcelain powder. Society suddenly realized that the natural world's just night miasmas, carrying dangerous health and recovery, but a supreme sanctuary of health and architecture completely transformed, replacing the dark, unventilated attics with grand open-windowed brick structures, glass sunrooms that let in the full spectrum of daylight, and expansive public gardens where people of every social class could walk together and breathe the deep freshness of the morning air. The tragic romanticization of illness was shattered forever by the absolute clarity of truth, leaving behind a world that worshipped strength, vitality, and the unburdened freedom of the open sky. Let the profound cleansing relief of this historical turning point bring an immediate sense of physical lightness and deep comfort to your own body tonight. The heavy locked prisons of the late Mortine Bay Jay have been broken open forever, and the smoke-filled salons flooded have been permanently swallowed with the clean air of a wiser world. The errors of that faded century have been fully corrected, the suffering has ended, and the long journey has found its perfect, healthy resolution. In the absolute security of your modern room, you are resting in the beautiful legacy of that truth. You do not need to shield yourself from the world, nor do you need to live within a cage of artificial expectations. Your atmosphere tonight is light, clean, and perfectly aligned with your body's natural need for healing and renewal. Feel your chest expand fully and effortlessly as you draw in the quiet peace of the night. Allow your thoughts to grow soft and distant, matching the steady, untroubled stillness of the dark hours, as your entire being sinks easily into a heavy, continuous, and beautifully restorative sleep. As the magnificent light of that scientific awakening and the fresh country winds completely wash away the remaining shadows of the past, a profound, unbroken silence settles our space. We have travelled through a sprawling historic landscape, from the soot-stained cobblestones of industrial cities to the locked candled nurseries, through the silent doors, the unventilated music rooms, the humid winter gardens, and finally into the open, sun-drenched verandas of the modern era. We have witnessed the ultimate triumph of life, nature, and fresh oxygen over the artificial barriers of class performance. Now the grand volume of history gently closes its final page, leaving you with an absolute unshakable sense of security, health, and total peace as the midnight hour deepens around you. The long struggle of that changing century has found its perfect, beautiful truce, and the world has settled into a state of quiet harmony. The heavy wooden shutters have all been converted into open windows, the toxic powders have turned to harmless dust, and the grand illusions of the sensitive elite have dissolved completely into the warm, healing light of yesterday. There are no more paradoxes for your mind to solve, no more historical pathways to explore, and no more weights for you to carry. The story has reached its happy, healthy destination, and it now invites your entire awareness to cross the final boundary into the world of undisturbed rest. Every rhythm, every description, and every breath of this narrative has done its work, gently untying the remaining knots tension within your body and preparing your spirit for a deep, continuous surrender. Tonight your modern room stands as a perfect sanctuary of clean air, undisturbed safety, and complete freedom. The pressures of the daytime world, the demands of productivity, and the noise of the outside streets have completely faded away into the dark sky. You have completed your journey. You have fulfilled every obligation of your day, and you are now permitted to exist in your most authentic, unburdened form. Let your body sink with complete heavy gravity into the soft comfort of your bed, feeling entirely protected, entirely anchored, and profoundly at peace. Let your breathing find its most natural, effortless cadence, rising and falling like a calm tide on a warm, moonlit shore. The candles have all been put out. The windows are letting in the clean freshness of the evening, and the universe is cradling you in its gentle, silent arms. This content was generated with the assistance of subsequently analysed, refined, and by the research team at Sleepy History with Karry. Ways all rights reserved. As the final words of this long journey melt into the quiet darkness, close your eyes to the waking world, release your last remaining thoughts, and float peacefully into a heavy, continuous, deep, and beautifully unbroken sleep.